I still remember the scent of cinnamon candles and the soft jazz playing from the speaker in the corner when my son said it to me. It was a Saturday afternoon in early December. I was sitting in the living room of Jordan's house, my son, sipping on a cup of cinnamon tea Camille had just made. The room was warm, carefully decorated with green plastic garlands, a fake Christmas tree over 7 feet tall glowing with white lights, and the new leather sofa that Jordan said Camille liked because it looked classy. I took a slow sip and said, if you want this year, I could make the turkey. The one with cornbread, stuffing like your mom used to love. Camille couldn't stop praising it last year, remember? Jordan sat in the armchair across the table, silent for a while. His fingers fiddled with his wedding ring. The fireplace light reflected off the polished glass coffee table between us. Then he looked up, leaning forward slightly, like he was about to say something he had been holding back for a long time. Dad, he started, his voice low, I think this year, it'd be better if you didn't come for Christmas. I thought I misheard. What did you just say? He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the TV stand, where the same Bluetooth speaker I'd bought him for his birthday 3 years ago still sat. Camille invited her parents over. They're not used to our kind of family atmosphere. They prefer French-style dinners, intellectual conversations. Her mom pays close attention to things, you understand, right? I didn't know how to respond. My mind went blank. Only the crackling of firewood and the scent of roasted chicken from the kitchen, where Camille was finishing dinner, filled the silence. I looked around the room. Every single detail, from the ivory curtains I once paid to have custom sewn, to the newly installed wooden floors Jordan said the old ones creaked too much, to the speakers, the chandelier, the furniture, every bit of it bore traces of me, of my sweat, my tears, and the money I had given without a second thought. So what you mean is, I said slowly, I'm not welcome in the very house I helped build. Jordan took a deep breath. Dad, don't say it like that. It's not about being unwelcome. It's just, this year is different. We're doing dinner with Camille's family. You can come next year. Next year. I repeated those two words like they had weighted in my mouth. He nodded, avoiding my gaze. Maybe you could visit Aunt Rosa instead. She always likes having you. Then we'll catch up the weekend after the holiday. I stood up. My body creaked as I got off the leather couch. My knees ached, from age and from decades of physical work that never let up. I looked straight at Jordan. Tell Camille's parents one thing for me, I said. Feliz Navidad. I turned and walked out without waiting for a response. Through the window, I saw the Christmas lights from the neighbors' houses blinking like they were mocking me. I shut the door behind me quietly. But deep down, I knew. This time, it wasn't just a door that had closed. Respect had to be restored, and arrogance would be corrected. You won't believe what I did next. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I remember the day Jordan first brought me to see this house. It was mid-March. The Albuquerque air was crisp, with a breeze from the north carrying the scent of damp earth and cactus flowers after rain. The house stood at the corner of Roselawn and Turner, 3 bedrooms, a small loft, a backyard big enough for an orange tree. Pale beige walls, red tile roof, wood floors still fresh. Camille stepped out from her parents' Lexus holding a printed list of materials that needed fixing. I want to replace all the ceiling lights, she said, her voice soft but firm. The kitchen floor needs stone-patterned tiles, and the master bedroom should have French-style glass doors. Jordan turned to me, his eyes cautious. What do you think, Dad? I looked into his eyes. This was once the boy who beamed when he rode his bike around the neighborhood. His knees scraped from playing soccer on the playground at San Felipe Elementary. Now he stood here in a tucked-in white shirt, looking at me as if presenting a pitch. I nodded without a word. 2 weeks later, I withdrew $42,000 from my retirement account, plus another $18,000 from the joint savings Maria and I once kept, to make the down payment for their home. Maria had passed from ovarian cancer when I was 57. Every time I touched the insurance fund she left behind, I hesitated. But that day, I signed the transfer without blinking. This is for the boy, I told myself. Maria would have wanted him to have a real home. The first month after Jordan and Camille moved in, I came to help with the move. I brought over the walnut dining table we used to eat on, the one Maria cherished. Camille frowned when she saw it. A bit too old-fashioned for my minimalist taste, she said, but she kept it reluctantly. 3 months later, Jordan called. His voice was hoarse. Dad, I lost my job. The company laid people off unexpectedly. I asked, is Camille still working at the interior design place? She took a break for a while. Could you help cover a few months of mortgage? Just temporarily. I said yes. Temporarily, I thought. Just a short while until he got back on his feet. But temporary became 5 years. I canceled my cable plan, started cooking at home, bought meat once a week. I remember trimming my nails with an old pair of scissors because I couldn't afford a decent grooming kit. Meanwhile, I kept sending $2,500 to Jordan's bank account, like clockwork, on the 15th of every month, enough to keep them from defaulting. Camille still had lunch at the Grove Cafe, still posted birthday dinners from Movado Hotel. I said nothing. I'm not good at asking for things. I just thought, maybe her parents help out too. But one day while fixing a leaking sink at their place, I found a bank statement that had slipped from Jordan's mail drawer. Sender T. Herrera, receiver J. Herrera. Note, mortgage support. They hadn't hidden the fact that I was carrying their lives. They just treated it as normal. Every time I visited, Camille greeted me with a polite but distant smile, like I was a technician sent to check the pipes. When I gave them a coffee maker for their anniversary, she said with a faint laugh, thanks, but I'm more of a cold brew person. I once overheard her whispering to a friend over the phone while I stood in the kitchen, yeah, my father-in-law is sweet, just a little, well, kind of old school. That cut deeper than the electric bill I covered last January, the same month I lived on instant noodles for 2 weeks. I reminded myself that a parent's love doesn't need to be acknowledged, that if your child has stability, then the sacrifice is worth it. But one rainy night in November, lying in my cold room, listening to the rain tapping on the old metal roof, I wondered, if I were to collapse tonight, would anyone notice? Would anyone care? Jordan no longer called to ask if I was okay. Camille never once offered a sincere thank you. No dinner invitations, no Father's Day hug, not even a message on my birthday. Only text titled, Dad, we urgently need $500 to fix the plumbing. Can you help? Or, Camille's card got frozen. Can you front the electric bill this month? I got used to helping in silence, but what I never got used to was the cold silence afterward. I thought I was strong, but slowly I no longer recognized the man in the mirror. From an electrician who once stood firm among wind and steel, I had become a man who bowed his head at every phone call, every condescending hint from a woman who had never known hardship. And then, after that afternoon, the afternoon Jordan told me not to come for Christmas, I realized I had given too much. So much that there was nothing left for me to hold on to. 3 days after that afternoon when Jordan told me not to come for Christmas, the phone rang at 10:32 in the morning. The screen lit up. Camille Flores. I set my coffee cup down on the wooden table, let the ringtone reach the third chime before answering. Hello, Dad Thomas. Camille's voice was as sweet as old syrup. Are you busy this afternoon? I looked out the window. The sky was perfectly clear, winter sunlight spilling over the walkway I had just finished sweeping. No, I'm free, I replied. Perfect, she said. My parents are flying in from Portland. They land at 2 o'clock on Alaska Air Flight 447. They'll be at Carousel 3. Could you go pick them up for us? Our car's in the shop. I looked at the clock. 10:33. No apology, no reference to the conversation from days ago. Just a command, soft as cotton and sharp as glass. All right, I said, I'll take care of it. Thanks, Dad, she said quickly. Oh, and wear that blue shirt you had on at Jordan's graduation. My parents care about these things. She hung up before I could reply. I sat back down and stared at the phone lying face down on the table. My eyes drifted toward the yard where the white poplar had already shed most of its leaves. And then I didn't go. That afternoon, I finished reading 3 articles from the December issue of National Geographic. I called Rosa, brewed black tea, finished the crossword I'd left half done the week before. At 2:15, I was holding my favorite ceramic mug and reading the sports section. At 2:40, the phone rang from an unknown number. I assumed it was Camille's father. I didn't answer. At 3:12, Camille called 3 times in a row. I let it ring. I pulled out some bread and cheese, made a grilled cheese sandwich, and took the first bite just as the phone rang again. At 5 o'clock, a black sedan pulled up in front of my house. 3 people stepped out. Camille, her father, Mr. Cody Morrison, and her mother, Mrs. Catherine. Camille marched to the door and knocked hard enough to make the glass tremble. I opened it. "Who do you think you are?" Cody snapped, his face red as rare steak. "We stood at that airport for over 3 hours like beggars. Do you even realize what you just did?" Catherine cut in, her voice sharp as vinegar. "We had to take a cab in this dry cold. At our age, that's a real risk. A decent man wouldn't behave this way." I stood silently. The cold wind slipped through the seams of my old flannel shirt, but inside I didn't feel cold anymore, only stillness. "Camille," I said, my eyes never leaving her, "a few days ago you told me I wasn't a fit for your family's atmosphere, and today you asked me to go pick up your parents. What exactly do you think I am? A driver?" Camille tried to smile. "Dad, you misunderstood. I thought we had sorted everything out. Today's just practical. Family helps each other, and I'm being practical too. I've changed my mind." Cody stepped forward and pointed straight at my chest. "You don't know who we are. I have people in the press, in the business council, banks, the Veterans Association. You think you can humiliate us and just walk away?" I didn't blink. No one can humiliate someone who's lost all expectations. Catherine took a long breath and let it out coldly. "A man like you clearly has no manners. A grown man with dignity wouldn't behave like this." I looked her straight in the eyes. "That's unfortunate. I used to think I was that kind of man. But I changed after spending enough time around the kind of family you just described." Camille stood behind, saying nothing. She turned and gently pulled her mother's arm. As they began to turn away, Cody muttered, "You'll regret this. I'll make sure the whole city knows who you are." I nodded slightly. "Then I wish you success." The door closed behind them with the quiet finality of a period. 3 days later, I saw my own face printed on page 3 of the Albuquerque Herald. The bold italic headline read, "Elderly couple is abandoned at airport during holiday in dangerous weather." Beneath it was an old portrait photo of me, one I had used for the company website 10 years ago. The article said, "Mr. Cody and Mrs. Catherine Morrison from Oregon came to visit their daughter in Albuquerque, only to be left at the airport by a relative, Mr. Thomas Herrera, in what they described as an inhumane act." "We were shocked," Cody was quoted. "At our age, no one should be left stranded in an airport parking lot." And the cold winter air made things worse. Catherine added, "A family member, especially one older in age, should act responsibly. Personal emotions must not interfere with care for loved ones." I folded the paper and placed it on the table. Not a single word about how I was excluded from Christmas. Not a sentence about the fact I had paid their mortgage for 5 years. Not a line about the utility bills I had covered while they dined at 5-star Italian restaurants. Only me, framed as a bitter, heartless, petty old man. I poured myself a new cup of tea, sat back down, and pushed the newspaper aside. For the first time, I didn't feel ashamed. I felt clarity. They didn't just want me gone from the dinner table. They wanted my name erased from memory. Very well, if it's a game, I'll play it through. I folded the newspaper with both hands, carefully, as if sealing the coffin of something that had died inside me. Not reputation, but trust. I wasn't angry. Anger was something I had felt in the early years of fatherhood, when Jordan first talked back, when Camille told me I had an outdated mindset. But that morning, I no longer felt like a father being disrespected. I felt like a man erased from his own life story, smeared in black ink across white paper. And I understood that if I remained silent, that image would become truth in people's eyes. If I kept my head bowed, they wouldn't just take my money, they would take away the dignity that had tried to protect all my life. I stood up and walked straight into the bedroom. Under the bed was a clear plastic container I always called the side drawer. Inside were documents I had never touched. Not because I feared them, but because they hurt. I pulled out each file, bank statements from Wells Fargo, Recurring payments I had set on auto for 5 full years. On the 15th of every month, exactly $2,500 left my account and went directly into Jordan and Camille's mortgage. I looked at the numbers. Steady, absolute, precise like clockwork. Never late, never missed. Just like the love I once believed had to be given unconditionally. I opened my laptop, logged into my account, downloaded additional PDFs, transfer slips, utility bills. The time I paid $760 to fix the roof because Camille feared leaks would ruin the plaster ceiling. Then came the photos. I opened Facebook and downloaded the images Camille had posted over those 5 years. The kitchen with new granite countertops, captioned, "Love our home so much." The birthday dinner at an upscale Italian restaurant, captioned, "Happy birthday to my husband, hard work pays off." The backyard strung with holiday lights, captioned, "Perfect space for the season, right?" Not once was there a mention of the man behind these accomplishments. No thank you, no recognition. But that absence made them perfect evidence. I reached for another file, the mortgage contract. Co-signer Thomas Herrera, signed on the 17th of April, 5 years ago. Back then, I didn't think twice about signing. I just wanted my son to have the chance I never did. I opened Word and started typing. 5 years, $187,500. The headline appeared like a quiet accusation. I itemized every cost. House down payment, $42,000, pulled from the joint savings under my name and Maria's. Furniture, washer, dishwasher, $9,800. 60 months of mortgage payments, 2,500 times 60s equals $150,000. Roof repair, utility bills, small loans, another $18,000. Total, $219,800. I looked at that number not with regret, but as confirmation. I hadn't been deceived by a single moment. I had been systemically manipulated. Outside, night had fallen. The house was quiet except for the wind slipping past the thin window panes. I thought of Maria, the woman who, even after only 32 years together, had left a warmth in me no one else had ever replaced. I wondered if she were still alive. Would she have let me give away so much? Probably not. I printed every file, sorted them into clearly labeled folders, added hardcovers. I wanted everything in order. I wanted the truth when the time came to be presented neatly, not with fury, not with tears, just fact. I wrote a 2-page summary, clean tone, accurate language, no pleading, no stories. I used their own language, polite, cold, legal. Near midnight, I stepped out to the porch and stood in the dark. Albuquerque this time of year was dry and cold, but without snow. I inhaled deeply, looking up into a sky without a moon. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel the need to be accepted. I felt awake. Tomorrow I would begin a plan not built on shouting, but on data. Not to hurt anyone, but to redraw the lines. They once thought I was the easiest man in the room to control. They were wrong. The next morning, I woke up at 6:12, earlier than usual, but my mind was clear as if it had been waiting for this moment for a long time. I made coffee, poured it into a ceramic mug that read, "Electricians never retire, they just lose contact," a gift from a young apprentice I once trained at the old company. Sitting in silence, watching the thin sunlight slowly slide across the floor, I picked up the phone and called the bank. "Thank you for calling Wells Fargo," came a young woman's voice after the automated menu. "This is Rachel. How may I assist you today?" "I'd like to cancel an automatic transfer," I said, my voice steady like seasoned wood. $2,500 a month, sent on the 15th. It's been running for 5 years. Rachel confirmed my name, date of birth, and account number. She paused for a few seconds to check the system. "I see this is a transfer to a mortgage account under Jordan Flores." "That's right. And you'd like to stop it entirely, starting this month." "Starting today," I emphasized. "Done," Rachel replied after a keystroke. "I've canceled the automatic transfer. You'll no longer be charged from the next payment cycle." "Thank you," I said, and quietly ended the call. I stayed seated for a few minutes, saying nothing, just listening to the silence around me, a silence that no longer weighed heavy but instead felt clean. No more countdowns to the 15th, no more calculating whether I had enough to pay the water bill or just enough for discounted sandwiches at Dollar Tree. I stood up, walked into the bedroom, opened the wooden cabinet where I kept all the files. One by one, I pulled out statements, receipts, invoices, laid them neatly on the dining table. They all spoke of one truth: I had sacrificed. But now I no longer needed to keep proof of what others had chosen to forget. I lit the backyard fire pit. The flame rose quickly, dry and clean. I burned them stack by stack, watching the fire consume numbers and words. When the flames touched the last page, a paint bill I once paid, because Camille said the old color lacked energy, I felt my throat loosen, like a cord wrapped around it for years had finally been cut loose. I went back inside, opened my laptop, bought a new dark gray sofa, the style I liked, without asking anyone's opinion. A model with a reclining back, footrest, and book pockets on both sides. Then I called a handyman to fix the back door hinge, which had been off for 2 years, but I never touched because I was too busy helping Jordan. The next day, I drove to a used furniture shop downtown Albuquerque, bought a vintage ceiling light fixture, the kind Maria used to love. Then I stopped by the market, picked up whole grain bread, cherry tomatoes, block cheese, red wine, and a tray of good beef. For the first time in years, I didn't check my calculator after each item. That evening, I made red wine beef stew with garlic toast. I played Bill Evans' jazz, an old CD I had tucked behind the heater. The kitchen filled with the smell of melting butter, and for the first time in a long while, I finished a full meal without thinking about which bill I had to cover for someone else next month. After cleaning up, I sat on my new sofa, turned on a soft yellow light, rested my legs on the footrest, and opened an old copy of All the Pretty Horses by Cormac McCarthy, a book I hadn't revisited since Maria passed away. No phone calls, no text from Camille asking for another $200, no message asking, "Dad, could you front the gas bill this month?" Just me, and the peace of silence. The following week, I repaired the par's roofing, changed the bulb in the backyard, and hired a painter to redo the living room walls in pale olive green. The house began to look more like me: simple, solid, unshowy. I reorganized the drawer, threw away old birthday cards from Jordan, photos where my face had shrunk smaller and smaller in the family frame. I kept a few things from Maria: the bowl she used for banana bread, a hand-stitched cloth that read "Amor primero, juicio después." Love first, judgment later. That's right, I had loved, with everything. But now I was clear. On a Thursday morning, I drove to the post office and mailed a small card to Rosa. "This Sunday, if dinner has one extra seat, I'll bring cherry pie." Rosa called back that evening. Her voice nearly cracked. "There's always a seat for you, Tom, always." I hung up and stood by the window, looking out at the old neighborhood I'd lived in for 22 years. The poplars had shed all their leaves, but I knew spring would come. New leaves would grow, new wind would blow, and I was ready, not to return to the past, but to live for myself. I was rubbing oil into the back porch chair when my phone buzzed in my shirt pocket. It was 9:47 on a Tuesday morning. Albuquerque sky cleared and dry, early winter sunlight soft enough to show the caller ID clearly. Camille Flores. I didn't rush to pick up. Let it ring through the first cycle before raising it to my ear. "Hello, Dad Thomas." Her voice carried that same canned sweetness, the kind people use to wrap words they don't really mean. "I was wondering if you could do me a small favor this Saturday afternoon." I didn't respond, just waited for her to continue. "My parents were invited to a reception at a friend's house, someone from Mom's charity circle. They don't know anyone here aside from our family. Jordan has to work late. I'm busy preparing my presentation. So could you pick them up at 4 p.m. this Saturday and bring them to 1168 West Paloma, Knoll Crest area?" I sat down on the step, wiped my hands with a towel, and kept my tone flat. "Why do you think I still do those things?" Camille hesitated, then spoke as if explaining something to a child. "Dad, we're family. Some things you just do for each other. This isn't personal. To me, I said, it's very personal. Come on. She changed tone, colder now. I know you're still upset about the article, but instead of holding a childish grudge, maybe try acting like the mature man you once were. I inhaled deeply, steady breath. You called me because there's no one else, isn't that right? Not exactly, but you're the most available. And to be honest, she said without pause, you're not on the same level as my family. We're educated people. You may not understand this, but events like these require polish, from appearance to conversation. I smiled faintly, not because it was funny, but because I'd heard that sentence, or some version of it, at least 10 times over the past 5 years. From the way I spoke English with a Southwest accent to not knowing the names of fancy French cheeses. Every time Camille drew an invisible line she believed she stood above, I answered, calm and low, see you on the night of the 24th. What? She said, caught off guard. Just wait for that night. I think it'll be a very memorable evening. A pause like she was trying to decode me. What do you mean by that? I didn't answer, just said, I won't be picking up anyone, but I promise. No one will forget that night. Are you threatening me? She snapped. I'm not scared of you, Thomas. You're bitter, petty, and pathetic. Someone like you will die alone because no one wants to be around you. Maybe, I replied softly, but at least I've stopped living like someone who had no worth. Then I hung up. The phone went still in my hand, screen darkening. Wind brushed the porch blinds. Across the street, a child's bike rolled across the neighbor's yard. I stood up, went inside, locked the door, and began sorting documents. Thick folders, meticulously arranged, accurate down to each number. I knew Camille wasn't afraid of words, but I also knew she wouldn't last long surrounded by things that couldn't be denied. And I had waited long enough for that moment. That Christmas Eve, the air in Albuquerque was colder than usual. No snow, but the wind burned the face raw. I wore the navy blue suit I once put on at Maria's funeral, shirt pressed flat, plain tie, polished leather shoes. In my hand was an old brown briefcase. Inside were 12 files, thick, heavy, arranged down to the last detail. I parked across the street, facing the house I once thought of as my son's home. Light from a 3-meter Christmas tree glowed through the window. Laughter, clinking glassware, Camille's voice from the kitchen, as if she were the perfect hostess in a curated holiday spread. I checked my watch. 6:47 p.m., just in time for the main course. I crossed the street, walked straight to the front door. The porch light flicked on automatically. I didn't knock. The door was unlocked. I stepped into a space filled with the scent of wine, sauce, and pretend. The dining room was to the left of the hallway. A long table covered in white cloth, 12 people seated, holding silverware, smiling with eyes full of what they thought was refinement. Camille stood near the kitchen, pouring wine for a woman in pearls. Jordan sat at the head of the table, his back stiff like he was bolted to the chair. Camille's parents, Cody and Catherine, sat near the center, chatting with a salt and pepper-haired couple dressed like they walked out of a lifestyle magazine. The entire room turned when I appeared at the doorway. Silence dropped like someone had pulled the plug. Good evening, I said, my voice low but clear enough to carry across the room. I apologize for coming unannounced, but I believe everyone should hear the truth before continuing with the main course. Camille quickly set down her wine glass and came toward me, face pale. What are you doing here? This is a private gathering. Leave right now, not before everyone learns whose money paid for this celebration. I placed the briefcase on the side buffet table, unlatched it, and began pulling out folders. I have 12 copies, one for each person. Please. I walked around the table, placing a file in front of every guest. Each contained monthly transfer statements from my account to the mortgage account under Jordan's name, receipts for construction materials, furniture, roof repairs, utility bills, photos pulled from Camille's social media, the new kitchen, the new sofa set, birthday dinners at upscale restaurants, and a printed copy of the article accusing me of abandoning elderly parents at an airport in a snowstorm, annotated in red ink. Fact: 52 degrees Fahrenheit, no rain, no snow. They arrived by taxi because I stopped being their unpaid driver. I spoke slowly, each word like placing a brick on tile. I am not the madman that article tried to make me. I am the man who kept this house afloat for 5 years, while being called uncultured, unworthy, and eventually removed from the very table I paid for. A woman seated beside Catherine picked up a statement. $2,500 every month for 5 years. That's unbelievable. I believe you've done labor work your whole life, said the gray-haired man at the head of the table. How could you afford all that? I canceled cable, stopped buying new clothes, lived on peanut butter sandwiches for nearly a year. My wife passed away, and I pulled her life insurance to give my son a head start. Jordan looked down. His hand clenched the napkin. Camille forced a smile. He did it on his own. No one asked him. It was all his choice. I turned to her, placed a paper on the table. This is the email Camille sent me last September. Dad, we're behind on the mortgage. Can you help? You always say family comes first. I looked around the table. I believed in family. I once did. But when kindness becomes the foundation for arrogance, silence stops being noble. It becomes complicity. Catherine stood, trying to keep her grace. Ladies and gentlemen, this is clearly a personal misunderstanding, and I think this kind of private— Not private anymore, I interrupted. Not private after your husband dragged me into the press, accusing me of abandoning 2 elders in a snowstorm. Not private after you used your status to humiliate an old electrician for not being fancy enough to dine with you. A silver-haired man slid the folder back toward Camille. Miss Camille, why didn't you ever mention how much your father-in-law helped? Camille snapped. He doesn't understand social positioning. He doesn't fit into events like these. My parents are educated people. We have standards. I stepped forward, cut in again. And I'm the one who paid for tonight's dinner. No one spoke. A fork dropped. The wind outside brushed the fake pine. The golden light suddenly felt cold. I adjusted my tie slightly and spoke calmly. You built a narrative, painted me as a lunatic. But I am only a father who once loved too much, endured too long, and tonight I came to say, I am done. The debt is no longer owed. The patience is no longer mine. And the money value will no longer come from me. I picked up the briefcase, scanned the table once more. I won't stay. I don't want an apology. I only need every person in this room, the ones who once looked at me like I was invisible, to understand that no one gets to build a castle on the back of someone else's kindness. I turned. Jordan stood up. Dad? I turned back, looked him in the eyes. Not tonight, not here, not while you still don't stand between right and wrong. I walked to the door and shut it behind me. The wind slapped across my face, cold, real, clean. I walked slowly toward my car. Behind me, arguments erupted from the house. Cody's voice rose. Catherine screeched. Camille was trying to explain something no one wanted to hear anymore. Jordan called out my name, but it was too late. I didn't turn back. Christmas Eve. No turkey with cornbread, stuffing, no wine, no candles, only me, an empty road and silence, for the first time carrying the taste of justice. 3 months later, the first letter arrived. Gray-white envelope, top left corner stamped with the Wells Fargo logo, red bold letters. Notice of default, final demand for payment. I received a copy because I had once co-signed it as the guarantor. Inside was the notice. Jordan and Camille had missed 3 consecutive mortgage payments. Total due by that point, $7,800. The bank demanded full repayment, plus interest and penalties, within 14 days or foreclosure would begin. I placed the letter on the kitchen counter. I didn't open my laptop, didn't call anyone, just finished the second half of my cold coffee and folded the letter like folding away a part of memory that no longer belonged to me. Things were happening on their own, without me. I've lived long enough to understand. The truth doesn't need to be shouted. It only needs the right moment, and a silence deep enough for others to finally hear themselves. 2 weeks later, the second article appeared, but this time, no one had hired the writer. No one had requested the piece. Page 2, Society and Faith column. Behind a party, the truth about a quiet father's rejected support. The article wasn't malicious. It wasn't biased, but it was enough to draw the line between light and shadow. The journalist, an independent reporter, contacted me after receiving a printed document from a guest at the Christmas Eve gathering. I didn't send it, but someone had kept it, and someone had seen it, too clearly to ignore. The article recounted what had happened that night, quoted a few parts from the packet I handed out. Didn't name me, didn't call me a victim, just referred to me simply as a father. And that was enough. Less than a week later, I heard Camille had been removed from the Albuquerque Grace Collective, the charity she used to boast about as her regional fundraising domain. A spokesperson from the group issued a brief press release. We cannot continue to partner with an individual who deceived and exploited the trust of others. Not long after that, her father, Mr. Cody Morrison, resigned from his honorary advisory role at the Rio Grande Business Alliance, where he had sat as mentor in legacy leadership for nearly 10 years. No one demanded it, but old handshakes had grown cold. New Year calls went unanswered, and someone inside the organization told the press, "Trust is an asset. Once lost, it can't be reclaimed." Catherine, the woman who used to host wine nights for politicians' wives, was no longer invited to speak at the PTA events of her granddaughter's private school. No reason was given, but the speaker list had been quietly updated. Her name was no longer on it. I didn't know any of this ahead of time. I didn't make it happen. I learned it through the news, through Rosa's voice calling from her kitchen. Tom, if you had seen Camille's face on the news yesterday, she wasn't a boss anymore. Just a woman in free fall. I didn't feel triumphant. I wasn't sad. I just felt light. Silence isn't weakness. It's the space where people are forced to hear their own voices. And now they had, loud and clear. At the end of March, one late afternoon with its scent of orange blossoms drifting in from the backyard, I was trimming back the lavender bush when I heard a car stop in front of the house. I looked up. Jordan. He stepped out of the car in an old suit, unbuttoned, pale-faced. In his hand was a folder. This time not mine. I invited him inside. He sat at the edge of the chair, as if sitting too long might drown him in the guilt he carried. "Dad," Jordan said, voice rough, "the house is about to be foreclosed. Camille, she's gone. She moved back to Portland with her mother." I nodded, didn't ask anything. "I don't know where to start," he said, "but I know if there's anyone left who still remembers me, it's probably you." I stayed quiet for a moment, then spoke, my voice steady. "I never forgot you, but a long time ago you forgot who I was." April in Albuquerque smelled like a tender memory. The sage bushes behind the fence had begun blooming in soft purple patches. Sparrows bounced along the power lines. On the kitchen windowsill, I placed a small pot of mint, the kind Maria used to love steeping for tea after dinner. The old house had changed. The wooden floors were freshly polished. The new sofa no longer smelled of mildew or bore the torn seams from those endless years of saving. A small painting I'd made back in school, a wooden bridge stretched over a quiet stream, now hung again on the living room wall, right above the old radio cabinet. I fixed every doorknob, scrubbed each patio tile by hand, planted rows of lavender along the walkway. Not for praise, not for anyone to come admire it, but because each morning when I opened my eyes, I needed to remember I was still alive, and for the first time in many years, living for myself. On Friday evening, as had become routine these past few months, I carried a chestnut tart to Lillian's house, my wife's niece. Her small family lived just a street away, under a row of leafy trees. Uncle Tom. The kids rushed to the door, hugging my legs. They knew the scent of the tart, knew the sound of my car bell before it stopped. Lillian was already in the kitchen, busy pouring glaze over the roast pork. Her kitchen was small but always warm, the smell of food and voices layered like an old, wordless lullaby. "Have you eaten yet?" she asked. "Haven't even thought about what I might eat." I smiled. "The smell from your front step already pulled me in." Dinner was simple: arugula salad, honey roasted pork, crusty bread, and the tart. We talked about the new lights just installed at church, about her oldest learning to play the drums, about the orange tree out back bearing its first spring fruit. No one mentioned Camille or Jordan, not out of avoidance, but because I no longer needed them to be at the center of my world. I used to live like a satellite, orbiting other people until I lost everything that was me. Now I've returned to my own axis. One late afternoon, I was wiping down the glass door when I saw a sedan pull up quietly in front of the house. The door opened, Jordan stepped out. No briefcase, no polished image to perform, just a rolled-up shirt, jeans, and a face for the first time in years that held no defense. "Do you have a minute?" he asked when I opened the door. I nodded, invited him in. This time, no distance, but also no embrace. Shy, Jordan sat at the edge of the armchair, the same spot where I used to wait for a text, a call, anything from him. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and placed it on the table. "Rental application," he said, "for the new apartment complex. I'm planning to move in there." Starting over, I didn't look at the paper. I looked at his eyes. "I didn't come here to ask for anything back," he said. "I just wanted to say, I chose wrong. For 5 years, I forgot who gave me a roof, who skipped meals so I could stand where I did. I know I no longer have the right to ask for anything, but I need to say it. I'm sorry." I stayed silent for a long while, long enough for both of us to breathe slower. "Jordan," I said, voice low, "forgiveness is easy. People can say it in a single sentence. But if you want to begin again, you have to start from the ground up. Not with words, with respect." I stood, placed my hand on his shoulder. "I'm old. I don't have time to wait again. If you mean it, you won't need me to tell you what to do. You'll know." Jordan nodded. His eyes were wet. No tears fell. But sometimes true regret doesn't need to be wet to be real. That spring passed like a breath held slow. I took morning walks, bought flowers at the farmer's market, learned how to make French beef stew from a woman in Oregon's YouTube channel, reread all the old books Maria once underlined. And every Sunday night, I wrote a single line in a small notebook. Today I lived well. I was no longer the man who paid utility bills for someone who disrespected him. I was no longer the name erased from dinner tables. I was Thomas Grady, 71 years old, a widower, a man who had once been cast out and walked out of the shadows with nothing but truth and the pride he never sold. I did not win through revenge. I won by living a life no one else could hold power over anymore. And that is freedom. For the first time in 8 years, I stepped into the spring of my life, with clean hands, a quiet mind, and no fear left inside me.